Hello and welcome to the CUFI UK podcast for Zion's sake. My name is Alastair, this is Alex.
Hello.
And in today's podcast, we discuss a range of topics, including wildfires in Israel, the Houthis, replacement theology, and Keir Starmer, and much more.
That's right, and we will let you know how you can get involved in defending Israel here in the UK through our campaigns and how you can counter the lies of the enemy.
Plus, please let us know your thoughts about any of the topics discussed in today's podcast by leaving your thoughts in the comments section below. So, Alex, last week we celebrated Israel's 77th anniversary since its independence, since the State of Israel was formed in 1948, and you know, what a wonderful thing to celebrate. We often use the phrase, Israel is 77 years young, 3,000 years old, because, you know, the story of Israel's history, of course, goes back thousands of years, and the re-establishment of Israel as a nation, its statehood, and, of course, the Jewish people returning to their ancestral homeland is a miraculous thing, a significant thing in world history, a pivotal moment.
Yeah,
and so we stood and we do stand with the nation of Israel in celebrating that wonderful, not just a achievement, and it was an achievement, but also a miraculous work in God's doing.
It's Bible prophecy being fulfilled before our eyes. Well, not before our eyes because we're a bit too young, but it is
just,
still
yes.
It was Bible prophecy being fulfilled, and it is to this day still being fulfilled before our eyes.
Absolutely, and will continue to be so. Of course, on the day after Israel achieved independence, gained independence, Arab armies surrounding the nation, the newly formed Jewish state, was attacked.
Yep.
And the reason why they were attacked was simply because Israel's enemies did not want a Jewish presence and a Jewish nation. They did not want Israel to have its sovereignty, and so thankfully and amazingly, and actually against all odds, Israel defeated the invading armies. I mean, just imagine, this was a newly created state with very, very limited resources and manpower, and yet the surrounding armies had the opposite, had such force and such, backing, and yet Israel lives. The nation of Israel lives. And over the past 77 years, Israel's enemies and, largely speaking, surrounding nations have continued to be disgruntled at a Jewish presence in their historic homeland, with Jerusalem as a Jewish capital. And to this day, and even as we speak, right, there are those who don't just have a grievance about it, they want Israel destroyed.
Exactly. I think, the anti-Israel movement, the pro-Palestinian activists and so forth, I think it's a misnomer to call them pro-Palestinian activists. I think they are anti-Israel activists who want to see Israel destroyed. And you see that same spirit of anti-Semitism, that anti-God spirit, through every aspect of the anti-Israel lobby's actions, whether it be at the UN, whether it be in the media, whether it be on the streets of London or New York, and, of course, in the terrorist groups surrounding Israel and the nations surrounding Israel who are trying to wipe out Israel. It's all for the same goal, for the same purpose.
Absolutely.
It's anti-Israel agenda.
An anti-Semitic agenda, I would add as well, I think, because, this is, and this is important that we do frame it with this terminology, is anti-Jewish.
Yeah.
This is a strip of land which is 1 square mile, is it smaller or larger, than Wales, right? And there it is, in this plot of land which forms part of actually a larger plot, which God promised. And so when we talk about 77 years of God's faithfulness to the state of Israel, we must acknowledge that actually it is 3,000 years of God's faithfulness to keep his covenant. And part of his covenant which, by the way, is not just limited to 3,000 years. His covenant,
Yeah.
the Bible says, is everlasting.
Yep.
Right? Everlasting. And so, that's why we must also recognize that part of the covenant is actually the promise of the land.
Yeah.
The land is tied up with the Abrahamic covenant, and so God has not rescinded that covenant.
Exactly.
And so the promise of the land is central to it.
Yeah.
Is a big part of it. Okay, so when the Houthis last week fired ballistic missiles, long-range missiles at Israel, it is just a continual reminder that Israel has to continually defend. The Jewish people have to defend what has been granted to them by God, but they're defending it. And as Christians who love God, who love the Bible, who recognize God's covenant and hopefully appreciate them and understand their value, should be standing with Israel and Jewish people in standing firm.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting you mentioned the land. I mean, obviously, the land is the main thing, but it's interesting because when I've spoken to Christians who are saying that Israel has been replaced and the church is now Israel, the one thing that sort of trips them up is the land. Because you say to them, well, what about the land? Are we meant to go there as Christians and own the land? Is Jesus coming back to, where's he coming back to? Because it's quite clear that he's coming back to Jerusalem, right? And so actually the land is the important thing. Yes, we are obviously Christians. We believe salvation is through Jesus. We believe Jesus is the Messiah. But that doesn't negate the land covenant that God made. And obviously, probably a lot more about this than I do. You've written about the different covenants that God has with the Jewish people. With there's the Adamic covenant. Am I right in saying that?
We're going to go
well,
down
I don't have to go too far, but just a very brief overview.
Yes. There's the covenant with Adam. There's the covenant with Noah. There's the Mosaic covenant. That through the law, Abrahamic covenant, Davidic covenant. That the covenant made with David. There's of course, the new covenant, which forms part actually of it's an offshoot of the Abrahamic covenant itself. Yeah. The land covenant, which is again part of the Abrahamic covenant, but there are more verses which reiterate the covenant regarding the land, reaffirms it. All of these covenants are under attack. Yeah. And we write about that in the article, in one of the articles in a recent Torch magazine. And, and why are they under attack? Every single one of God's covenants are under attack by the enemy, Satan, because they represent God's plan and intention and promise to fulfill all of his plans and purposes for mankind and for Israel and for the Jewish people, and actually for us as Christians as well, who've been grafted in and form part of the Abrahamic covenant through faith in Jesus Christ. So all these covenants from the Garden of Eden all the way through the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, are under the attack of the enemy. So it shouldn't surprise us and it shouldn't daunt us, but actually it should remind us that we need to stay firm, keep our eyes, on God, and not be swayed, especially by you rightly highlighted, false teaching, which is undermines God's promises to Israel and the Jewish people, but actually also undermines very much part of what our faith is as Christians. Yeah. Because if you are going to dismantle God's promises to Abraham, you're actually then undermining the very roots of our faith as Christians, and our roots are in the is in the Jewish faith. Yeah. And in the word of God, which was given to the Jewish people, and from whom came a Jewish Messiah who we as Christians recognize as Jesus, who was a Jew. So replacement theology, which of course we don't have time to explore in detail, is actually very detrimental and misleading to a lot of Christians. Sorry, you carry on because I've got a psalm, but.
Well, no, I was just going to say, just to sort of add on to that basically, I mean, you've very much concisely sort of mentioned everything there far better than I would have. So thanks for doing that. No. But I think, it sort of hits on all those things. It's like, we say it all along that basically Satan is manipulating the entire world against Israel. And obviously the Bible says that in the last days, the whole world will turn against Israel. At the same time, he's manipulating the church to turn his back on Israel.
Yes.
Its back on Israel, I should say. And that's why with replacement theology, standing with Israel, we always say it here at CUFI, because I'm a Christian, I stand with Israel. Israel is not a political issue, it's a Bible issue. I think personally that the replacement theology is one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing, that undermines Christianity as a whole. It undermines God's plans and purposes on earth. And so when Christians are literally ripping pages out of the Bible, taking away God's promises to Israel, they are, like you said, they are undermining the root. And all that does is serve Satan's agenda.
Yes.
And so,
Apostle Paul said, be careful.
Yeah.
Be cautious. Don't you realize that actually the root supports you?
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, and so you have Christians, and, we won't go into details now, but there are many Christians who are aligning literally with the enemy.
Yes.
Instead of standing with Israel, they're going to Iran and praising Khomeini. Instead of standing with Israel, they're going to the Houthis and Hamas and standing with them and calling them friends. How on earth can Christians, so-called Christians, align with evil and think that they're doing God's will? It is absolutely, it's undeniably a falsehood that they're being led by.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the psalm that you've got?
No, it's the Psalm. Psalm 105 is a reminder of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right, so we have to remember that covenant was passed on and inherited, and to all their descendants.
Yep.
And it says, He is the Lord our God, His judgments are in all the earth. He remembers His covenant forever, the word which He commanded for 1,000 generations, the covenant which He made with Abraham, and His oath to Isaac, and confirmed it to Jacob for a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. So that's it. It's an everlasting covenant.
Yep.
No dispute there in terms of who inherited, who was the recipient of the covenant with Abraham after Abraham. It's clear, okay, that it was to Isaac and to Jacob and as an everlasting. And then it says, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan as the allotment of your inheritance. So there it is in that psalm, that allotment, that piece of land, and it says, when they were few in number, indeed very few, and strangers in it, when they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people, He permitted no one to do them wrong. Yes, He rebuked kings for their sakes. Well, I think there might be a few kings and
prime ministers,
prime ministers who might be rebuked for various reasons regarding the treatment of Israel and the Jewish people. But I must complete this verse. It says, yes, He rebuked kings for their sakes, saying, do not touch my anointed ones, and do my prophets no harm. That is talking about the Jewish people.
Yep.
It absolutely. It's not talking about, okay, we understand the context of anointing when it comes to Christians, etc. This is talking about the Jewish people, no doubt. Do not touch my anointed ones, and do my prophets no harm. And, God says, we read elsewhere in the Bible, that Israel's the apple of God's eye.
Yeah.
So those who attack Israel are touching His anointed ones.
Yeah.
And that's why, actually, in the end, it does not bode well for those who turn their backs or turn against Israel and the Jewish people.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We need to take a lesson from that. I think history is a record of testimony about what does happen when a king and an empire and a people group turn and attack Israel. But it should be a lesson for us as a nation as well, because blessing and cursing hangs on this.
Yeah, exactly.
The future of our nation hangs upon, I believe, to a large extent, our attitude towards Israel and the Jewish people.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Yeah, and I think obviously when we started the podcast, we planned on talking about something completely different to this, and I think we've obviously been led that way, which is a good thing.
Yes, it wasn't football though.
It wasn't football. Yeah. But obviously, this is something we need people to understand, because this is God's heart for Israel, and history attests to this. What's the saying? Pastor Hagee says, where are the Greeks? Where are the Romans? Where are the Nazis?
Yes.
They're all in the boneyard of history because of the way they treated.
And where are the Philistines?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Where's Pharaoh? It's anyone who touches God, the apple of God's eye, is going to receive God's wrath as a result of it. And I think that's why we as the church need to be warned. How is it, the British Empire, that many great Western nations that were founded on biblical principles are now seeing a downturning there? Well, I think there's two things. First of all, they've neglected God's teaching, the Bible.
Yeah.
They have removed Jesus from the classroom, removed Jesus from politics, tried to separate it out in that way. And the second thing is they've turned their back on Israel. So God's people, in two ways, they've abandoned, and now they are not being blessed in the way that they were beforehand. So I think it's a warning for all nations, but especially the Western nations that are Judeo-Christian nations in their founding. They should know better.
Yes,
and they are now seeing a downturn. And I think this also goes back to America. America is one of the few countries that is seemingly holding Christian values up to a higher standard than, for example, the UK is. And, will God bless them as a result of blessing Israel? And also, it's a warning to President Trump and his administration, be careful how you treat Israel, because in his first term, obviously, he did some things which were very supportive of Israel. He's still carrying on that legacy today, which is a great thing. But obviously, there's always something else around the corner. There's other nations who are treating Israel badly, like Turkey and so forth. Yeah. He needs to be careful that he's standing on the right side of history, with that.
We often say that Britain's stand with Israel begins with the church. And even if, Westminster is getting it wrong regarding Israel, I believe that one of the keys to revival, and there's lots of certain contributions towards revival happening, but to a large extent, it's actually getting back to the Bible.
Yeah.
And if we get back to the Bible, we will see God's plan and purposes on the pages regarding Israel. So I think actually part of what God has started to do in this nation is because there is a move of God's Spirit, of course, but actually there needs to be a rejection of the false doctrines that have actually led some parts of the church astray. And I think there'll be a rejection of that and a turning towards the things, towards truth.
Yeah.
Okay, and a hunger for truth, and and a seeking for truth, and that's what we desire. And I think when we go to different parts of the country, speaking about CUFI, speaking about Israel, there's a hunger to see a revival within the church. And we're seeing it. We're seeing more Christians, get connected with the CUFI, who have the same desire to see this nation changed. Yeah. And it's so wonderful to think that actually God hasn't finished with this nation yet.
No, exactly.
That's my hope anyway. That's my prayer, that God has not finished with this nation.
Well, he's not finished with us as Christians.
No.
So, there is still hope.
There is still
as long as there are Christians in that nation.
Absolutely. But just moving on to some of the topics that we do have listed to speak about.
Some news,
is that last week we started saying about the 77th anniversary of Israel's independence. Well, last week, of course, the events in Israel were overshadowed by the wildfires and horrific scenes. It's some of the worst wildfires in Israel's history, in fact. And one of the things that I think it's important to acknowledge is that, of course, there have been a number of serious wildfires in various parts of the world. So Israel is not alone in that. But a big difference, and this is where the Jewish state is unique in, I think, is that the fires were either started initially through arson, but were certainly exploited.
Yeah.
Because Hamas themselves called upon Palestinians, and particularly youth, Palestinian youth, to set fires in Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, as well as other Palestinian state media as well, calling upon people to start fires. So this is they were fanning the flames of anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Well, definitely on social media.
Yes.
There was a lot of people who were celebrating it.
Yeah.
And you have to bear in mind, a lot of the people who are on the anti-Israel activist side of things, a lot of them are very much like environmentalists, and they claim to be the people who are saying, we need to protect civilians and so forth. Well, they don't seem to care when it's Israeli civilians who are under threat. They don't seem to care when it's the trees and the olive groves of Israel, And yet, actually, we've seen, before the war, there were so many posts of, Israel's knocked over an olive tree that was, 300 years old. Well, some of the Palestinian arsonists targeted olive trees, and there's hundreds of olive trees that were set alight in attempts to start bigger fires. And so what I'm trying to say is it's just, again, the hypocrisy that's there. When you look at the map of where the fires started, I think there was only one or two that started in Palestinian territories, and they were actually near, well, I say Palestinian territories, I mean Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and they were near Israeli settlements, as they call them, or Israeli towns, as we call them.
Yes.
And all the rest of them were within Israeli territory, which is very odd because, there's no physical, in that area anyway, there's nothing physical that would stop the fires from spreading to both sides, but actually it was because majority of them were started by arson. And again, like I said, with the people who claim to be, about protecting civilians, they don't seem to care at all when it's Israeli civilians who are having to evacuate their homes. Instead, they're laughing and gleeful over that. And the amount of anti-Semitic outpouring there is anytime anything like this happens, it is horrific. A lot of people around the world, especially those who have been brainwashed with Islamist agendas and especially anti-Semitic sort of, have been brought up in that. They are, this is the sort of thing they celebrate. And actually, like you said, going back to the War of 1948, the War of Independence, where Israel was attacked, this was mimicking that, really. It was, it was 77th Independence Day, and suddenly Israel's dealing with a catastrophe where the, murderous anti-Semitic forces wanting to wipe them out were again attempting to cause damage to them.
Yes.
And on another level, if you think about it, the Palestinians, who are the ones who claim to love the land, were there destroying it. Jerusalem, the main highway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, was shut down. Jerusalem itself was under threat from these fires.
Yes.
And yet the Palestinians claim to love Al-Quds, as they call it, to want to liberate Al-Quds.
Yeah.
No. They don't care about the land. They don't care about Al-Quds. All they care about is wiping out the Jewish people.
Yes.
All they care about is removing the Jews from owning the land.
Do you remember when we did Lessons from Nehemiah?
Yeah.
That series, which is available from the CUFI UK store. And one of the episodes in that series was really, one of the points I remember making was that the opponents against the Jewish people in Jerusalem was that the accusation leveled against them was that they wanted to rebuild the walls and rebuild the gates, reconstruct the gates to make it livable for the Jewish people that had returned there.
Mm-hmm.
They actually would rather have left Jerusalem derelict and in ruins than to see it rebuilt.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is kind of like the attitude I think I'm reminded of when we talk about this, is that actually they would rather Israel be in ruins and Jerusalem to be derelict than actually see it rebuilt.
Yeah.
And when Israel was reestablished in 1948, one of the most remarkable things that has happened or happened in the years immediately and has continued since was the amazing way in which Israel has flourished under Israeli rule.
Yes, yeah. Well, yes, that's prophecy being fulfilled again, isn't it?
Absolutely.
With the land coming back to life when the Jewish people return. Yeah, you remind me actually, because we were talking about this last week, and I'd seen an example on social media where someone mentioned the judgment that Solomon made when, the story in the Bible where two women come to King Solomon, saying, this is my baby. And Solomon says, well, let's get a knife and chop the baby in half so you can have half each. And obviously, this isn't talking about cutting a baby in half. It's actually looking at the wisdom of Solomon, because the reaction from the women proved, who was the real mother. And with it, what it was two mothers. I'll just explain it quickly. Two mothers, two babies. They lived in the same home. No one else was with them to witness it. One of the mother's babies died in its sleep, so she switched the babies and stole the other woman's baby. So when the mothers went to Solomon, the real mother said, she needs to give me my baby back because she's stolen my baby. The mother who had stolen the baby said, no, it's my baby, etc. Solomon then said, let's chop the baby in two. At that moment, the real mother said, no, leave the baby whole. She can keep the baby, just don't kill my baby. Whereas the mother who was not the real mother, she actually said, no, let's chop him in half so both of us can be sorrowful. So she was so upset with, and obviously Solomon worked out who was the real mother, gave the baby to the real mother, that sort of thing. But the thing is, the woman who had lost her baby was so upset that she wanted the other mother to suffer. She was basically so vengeful in that moment that she wanted the other mother to suffer just like her. She didn't want the mother to have the baby. And I think when someone mentioned this about like the land of Israel, I was like, that's so true. It's like they're willing to literally burn down the land of Israel, to destroy the land in order to make it uninhabitable so no one can live there, rather than to let the Jewish people live in their ancestral homeland. And it is that vengeance, that vengefulness that is there unfortunately within the Palestinian movement, the Palestinian people. And unfortunately, it is a spiritual thing.
In a way, there was a dividing of land that took place in 2005 when when Israel withdrew from Gaza, and Jewish residents in Gaza had to withdraw and relocate. And of course, a year later, Hamas took full control of the Gaza Strip. And here we are in a situation, all these years later, where Hamas invades Israel, slaughters innocent people, innocent Israelis in their own homes and in their beds. Israel retaliates. Israel doesn't just retaliate. I mean, Israel attacks Hamas in order to try and remove the threat, to remove Hamas and to get the hostages back. Now, Israel seems to have the upper hand. And this week, Netanyahu is saying, well, actually, there will need to be an Israeli presence in order to continue the dismantling of Hamas and facilitate the aid and et cetera, but it will be under Israel's oversight. Actually, that is well within international law. If you get invaded and you obviously have to defensively then respond and you gain territory as a result, you are within your legal right. But anyway, irrespective of the fact that, of course, that is land promised to the Jewish people, right? As we were talking before. But there we have something like Israel is so much more about protecting life and wanting to protect their own people. And actually, irrespective of what all the anti-Israel narratives say, actually want to protect Palestinian lives as well. Yet Hamas, in contrast, will literally go to, the depth of no depth. There's they can't go any lower in terms of they have no value of human life, whether it be Jewish or whether it be Arab or whether it be children or whether it be themselves. I mean, they literally, they are so blinded and hoodwinked and delusional.
Yeah. It's like a cult of death.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. But you contrast that with Israel. Israel, at the moment, I mean, Netanyahu's obviously coming under some criticism for suggesting that. He never suggested it would be permanent. But there is saying, well, actually...
But it might be.
Yeah. And it might have to be.
Yeah, it might have to.
And we'll talk about that in another podcast, right? I'm sure.
Yeah.
But that is happening right now as well.
Yeah.
And
I think that it's important to note that, because there's obviously a lot of international criticism of Netanyahu and his plan for Gaza. And the fundamentals of it, for now anyway, are the international community is calling for more aid to be delivered into Gaza. Israel is unwilling to give that aid if it enters into the hands of Hamas. So what they are proposing, like, this is one of the things anyway, because obviously there's a whole number of things, but one of the ways they are proposing is that basically there's a plan to establish a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that would oversee aid distribution through Israeli military secured zones and private contractors, primarily in southern Gaza. And it includes measures such as biometric screening of aid recipients and the use of private security firms, some are reportedly from America, to manage distribution points. And so the stated aim is to prevent Hamas from seizing aid, which it uses to turn a profit, because it takes that aid and it sells it on. And obviously the international outcry is this is against human rights, this is not going to help humanitarian aid, and so on and so forth. And it's when reality is Israel has to ensure, like under international law, it has to ensure that civilians get aid. It does not have to ensure that that aid gets to Hamas. In fact, giving aid to Hamas is, counterproductive. It doesn't need to, because Hamas is the enemy. The civilians, however, are not the enemy. The civilians are the ones who they need to provide aid for. So there's this big sort of uprising against that at the UN aid agencies. We've got charities, not-for-profit organizations, and so forth. Yeah. Human rights organizations all coming out saying this is against human rights.
Yeah. Because they argue that it should be, the provision of aid should be neutral.
Yes.
And yet they seem satisfied that it goes into the hands of Hamas. There's no neutrality, is there?
No, there's no neutrality. And also the obvious route of where that aid is going is Hamas. Hamas has the guns. Hamas has the control. Hamas sets fear into people's lives. And the thing is, there's so many videos out there of when Palestinians have been accused of stealing or accused of taking aid that belongs to Hamas, in quotes. Hamas literally have shot them in the legs or even executed them because of that. There's even been, because people may not realize, but Gaza is very tribal. And so there's different groups and factions and families that own different areas and so forth. So, a Hamas security official may accidentally kill the son of a tribal person, and then suddenly a tribal group is against Hamas, and it causes big issues. And it's just interesting to me that there's such opposition to this when actually Israel is willing to give all the aid that civilians need to civilians and to ensure it goes to civilians. But the international groups now, including the UN, are actually refusing to help Israel with this plan because, from my perspective, the UN, whether they think this is true or not, what they are doing is the UN and other aid agencies are actually trying to keep Hamas in control. Why are they trying to do that? Because you hear from different governments and world leaders and even the UN where they say Hamas are not good. But Hamas, in their mind, is better than letting Israel have control over the Gaza Strip because they don't want to rescind any of that control over to Israel. It looks like the UN and so forth are willing to compromise on their anti-terror stance, which is, basically they are willing to allow Hamas to have this aid if it harms Israel's ability to control the Gaza Strip. Because even though they say they're against Hamas, really they are against Israel controlling Gaza.
Yes, and Netanyahu has said this isn't about controlling Gaza, it's about ensuring that that Hamas is demilitarized and can no longer pose a threat to Israel. And that has not yet been achieved, has it?
Exactly.
But the proposal is that actually Israel will be able to remove the threat from Hamas, and with partners. And he's been very clear that he's looking to international parties to help in the rebuilding of of Gaza, and has said that it does not involve the removal, the force removal of Palestinians. So it's very important that we sort of hear about what is being planned. But either way, I think we all recognise the fact that after October the 7th, Hamas must not be allowed to rearm, regroup, and continue to pose a threat to Israel.
Yeah, exactly.
Shall we move on to another topic? What's Keir Starmer been up to then? Because where do we begin?
Yeah, there's quite a lot, man.
Let us talk about who he had visit number 10 Downing Street. It was the Palestinian Prime Minister.
That's right. So Keir Starmer on the 28th of April hosted the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa in London. And so this was the first official Prime Minister visit to the UK since 2021. And this is the first time actually that Mustafa is the guy there, because a couple years back when Joe Biden was president of America, he and the European nations were putting heavy pressure onto the PA to reform. And there were sort of threats saying, if you don't reform, we're going to remove financial backing for you, etc. Well, what effectively they did, Abbas made his entire cabinet resign. They all stepped down, and then Abbas put some new people in place, and still kept those other people on as part of the sort of 12 senior figures within the PA. So all they did really was reshuffle the chairs a bit.
Right.
And then that was apparently enough reform to enable the UK, the US, and others to then start giving money back to the PA. So he came over, Mustafa, his first visit. And by the way, Mustafa is an Abbas sort of, what's the word? Someone who's very loyal to Abbas, anyway, a loyalist, that's the word I'm looking for. He's an Abbas loyalist. Mahmoud Abbas, by the way, has been the president of the Palestinian Authority for about 20 years. I think it is maybe 19 years. And he was
counting.
Yeah, he was counting. He was only elected to serve 4 years, but he's been there for so long. So he is a dictator over the Palestinian Authority. He is called the moderate. We spoke about the Pope in the last podcast. He called him an angel for peace, and so forth. And the PA is seen as this partner for peace for Israel. It's an absolute lie. It is a falsehood. It is, politicians unfortunately do lie, and one of the big lies they say is that the Palestinian Authority is a partner for peace. Some of them, well,
not all of them.
Yes, some politicians don't lie. Not all of them. Yes. Well, we'll see about that. I'll wait to find an online politician. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Just a joke. But so the Palestinian Authority is a funder of terrorism. They have the stipends to terrorist families, where they literally pay millions and millions of pounds, which is funded by the international community, where they pay terrorists for murdering Jews and attacking Israel.
So what did the Palestinian Prime Minister
get back up to this.
Leave with from number 10 in his suitcase?
Well, he left with £101 million.
Right.
So, yes.
Of taxpayer money.
Of UK taxpayer money. And this is because basically he said that we're reforming the system. He's not reforming the pay for slay payments to Palestinians. He's not reforming the indoctrination of school children. He's not reforming the praising of terrorists. He's not reforming any part of his government. All he's reforming really is how they spend the money, in terms of making sure it's a bit more carefully spent between, the multi-billionaires who head up the PA. So basically, he's not reformed in any way any of the things which, should be the things which stop him from getting money.
Yes.
Instead, he's basically said, we'll pay our road sweepers a bit different and clear up the finances. He's just shuffled a few things around and walked out the door of 10 Downing Street with £101 million.
I think a lot of people listening to this or watching this will probably be quite shocked to hear that, that the United Kingdom is still giving money to the Palestinian Authority without there being the reforms that that basically commit the Palestinian Authority to not support, facilitate, and reward terrorism. Because you mentioned about the pay to slay, which, just to expand on that, is essentially a policy where the Palestinian Authority pay the family of terrorists who are either imprisoned or terrorists who die committing a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
And that is basically a funding for the family that remains.
Yes.
Or in some cases, even in lieu of the terrorist that is in prison.
Yeah. So basically, if a Palestinian in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria goes into Israel, stabs and kills a Jewish person, and then is arrested by Israel and is in prison, the Palestinian Authority will reward that terrorist and his family with a monthly payment, which is like a monthly salary.
Yes.
And that will happen for the rest of their lives.
Yes.
And if not beyond, if they've died, it will go to the family. And Mahmoud Abbas and also Mustafa have said that even if they only have 1 penny left in the coffers, then it will go to the terrorist families, or the martyrs' families, as they call them, because basically they believe it as such a fundamental right to kill Jews that they have. It's enshrined in law within the Palestinian Authority.
And this is the governance which is based in Ramallah.
Yeah.
And just to, if it might be helpful to some to explain that this is not Hamas.
No,
right? This is not Hamas, and yet these control the Palestinian territories in the so-called West Bank.
Yeah.
And we repeatedly saying, like, we have to be careful that, it does not lead to an October the 7th, which was in Israel South, happen in the West Bank.
Yeah.
And we already know there's support in the West Bank for Hamas, but also the Palestinian Authority is seen as the more moderate party and partner when it comes to a possible, discussions for two-state solution.
Yeah, which is actually what they discussed in 10 Downing Street. So
right,
but you're 100% right. The Palestinian Authority is put forward as this peace partner, but it is a fallacy. More Israelis have been killed by the Palestinian Authority's terrorists than by Hamas. So, if you think about the first Intifada, second Intifada, all these different things that happened, the Fatah's terrorist group, which is now no longer associated with the PA, but they're still supporting them. They still praise them every time that there's an anniversary and so forth. It's like, it's just an illusion. Abbas and his prime minister will say things to the Western world that are maybe against terrorism, against Hamas. But when they're talking to their own people, they are praising Hamas all the time. I mean, just an example, there was, way before October 7th, a couple of years back, there were 2 Israelis who were in the West Bank getting their car serviced at a garage, and they were sitting there waiting whilst someone was working on their car, and a gunman came up and shot them both dead in the head. 75% of Palestinians in the West Bank supported that and said that more attacks like that should happen. That is funded, that sort of mentality there is because of the indoctrination of the Palestinian Authority, which we are funding. So people try and take away, they say the PA is secular, they say all these different things. The PA ultimately is run by Islamists, radical Islamists, who have a similar ideology to Hamas. They just have a different way of politically engaging with the world.
Yes.
And so, that's how people should look at it. But unfortunately, our government is blind and stupid. So I'm going to tell you what Keir Starmer said, and also David Lammy, who's the foreign minister. He, they basically signed a memorandum of understanding, which establishes a framework for a UK-PA cooperation, emphasizing a 2-state solution, economic development, trade and security. It recognizes the PA as the sole and legitimate governing entity of the occupied Palestinian territories and calls for a reunifying of Gaza and the West Bank under the PA.
Right.
So, they spoke about 2-state solutions. Starmer reaffirmed the UK's commitment to recognizing a Palestinian state as part of a 2-state solution, addressing peace, dignity, and security for both Israel and Palestinians, and ceasefire and humanitarian concerns and so forth, regional cooperation, and obviously we gave them a whole bunch of money. So it shows that, the UK under Keir Starmer has no clue what it is doing when it is siding with these people. Having said that, the Conservatives before them were better, but not much better. Unfortunately, they were still hoodwinked by the PA, thinking that the PA were this moderate group. Whereas, I just want to emphasize Mahmoud Abbas funds terror. He was the funder, the financier of the Munich massacre. He was right-hand man to Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat is he was someone who won a Nobel Peace Prize. Again, though, he was the mastermind and also the person who pushed forward the first and second intifadas, which resulted in thousands of Israelis and Palestinians die. So they are not partners for peace, and we should not be hoodwinked by them.
You mentioned the Conservatives. This week, there have been a group of Conservative Party MPs, a dozen senior Conservative MPs and peers, so that's 7 MPs, 6 members of the House of Lords, that signed a letter to Keir Starmer urging him to recognise a Palestinian state. We'll come on to that in a minute. One of those is actually an MP that was formerly supportive of Israel and has achieved quite a bit of publicity as a result of coming out and stating that he was wrong and that he now stands fully with a recognition of a Palestinian state, and actually in his wording was not very complimentary of Israel at all, repeating some of the, quote, genocidal slurs that have been attributed to Israel. So basically, hook, line and sinker, what the anti-Israel lobby has been saying, which is why it is important to write to your MP with the truth, because we are so thankful to MPs that are supportive of Israel, and there are many, and across different parties as well. But there are many that are sort of, let's just put it this way, perhaps more on the fence than we realise, and are looking at their advice from their advisors, looking at the various news sources as their point of reference. And quite frankly, like so many people, are being duped into believing the lies which are out there. We must not take for granted the fact that there are MPs that will be swayed and lured by the falsehoods which are out there. And the number 10, it would seem to be, seems to have also not be on a right path. The Prime Minister the Palestinian Prime Minister visited 10 Downing Street. Keir Starmer, since becoming Prime Minister, has never met Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And I researched earlier to see whether or not he'd actually ever met him, even before. They have never met. Keir Starmer has never met Benjamin Netanyahu. They were in the same city in New York when they were both attending United Nations meeting, and apparently the diaries didn't work out. But has there been any... We don't know the answer to this.
No.
But what efforts have been made to actually meet, from our part, from Keir Starmer? I'm quite certain Benjamin Netanyahu would be ready to meet British politicians at a drop of a hat. But has Keir Starmer made an attempt to meet Benjamin Netanyahu? So carry on.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I'm not sure Netanyahu would be willing at the moment, actually, because, but you know what I mean. In principle, of course, but for one reason, and that is that David Lammy, the foreign minister, basically said that they would consider arresting Netanyahu based on the false reports of the ICC, even though there is now...
so here's the thing.
This is the problem we've got. Say, right? We've got an anti-Israel government. We have David Lammy's comments saying that if Netanyahu enters Britain, he'll be arrested.
Okay? And yet we have the Palestinian Prime Minister, in light of everything which you're saying, welcomed and sent home with a party bag of 101 million. And yet the Prime Minister of Israel... And Israel is our closest ally in the Middle East, and we have a very good relationship between Britain and Israel in various sectors. Is a topic which even we don't know that we don't know the answer to, whether or not he would be welcomed in the heart of our government.
I know. And that is a massive issue. Like I don't think people realize, because the problem is we have people like Keir Starmer saying the rhetoric, like we are a friend of Israel, we support two-state solution, we want peace for Israel, this and the other, when all of their actions seem to be going the opposite way. And the same is like with the UN. The UN says, two-state solution. Everyone says these same mantras, but then what's the end result of their actions? Is it strengthening Israel or is it weakening Israel? Is it, honoring God or is it going against God? Like, look at these different things. And it goes back to what I was saying about how the UN is treating Hamas. Hamas is not allowed to rule Gaza. Oh, wait, hang on a second. You have to give them aid, and humanitarian aid is now conditioned on the fact that it has to go to Hamas, not just civilians, because we can't allow Israel to take over in that way because that would be inhumane. And ultimately, they don't want Israel to control it. And the same is with Keir Starmer. He says with his lips that he supports Israel, but his actions are to weaken Israel and to strengthen Israel's enemies. We have to be clear about this and blunt about it.
Yes.
And the same goes back to what you're saying about the propaganda, write to your MPs and so forth. Well, we've got 2 campaigns at the moment, which we're running because, and we might even have to have a third campaign coming up soon because right now we are in a political battle, a spiritual battle, really. And we are fighting against the odds. We're fighting against a massive machine that is against Israel. When we look at the BBC, our BBC campaign, and by the way, with both of our campaigns, go down into the description, click on the links below, sign the petitions, write to your MPs if you're in the UK. Or if you don't want to write to your MP, just sign the petition, please, because it really does help. But yeah, we're in big battles right now. We have to fight. The BBC is hoodwinking people into believing lies.
Yes.
The BBC is propaganda for Hamas. There is no ifs, no buts, no two ways about it. It is propaganda for Hamas. Even today, you showed me a headline which was clear Hamas propaganda, and it's written by their senior editor. I don't think we need to go into details of it, but every time we go into the BBC, it is propaganda for Hamas. Yeah. There was a key leader within the military of the UK. We'll talk about him in more detail in the future, but the long and short of it is he believed the lies of the BBC. He was very anti-Israel. He was invited by Israel to go to Gaza to see operationally how things were going. And when he saw how Israel operated, he said on record, he has been hoodwinked by the propaganda of the media. And he has changed his stance. And he is one of the most senior people in the UK military. I'll get that for next time we have the podcast and I'll explain it in more detail, because even someone with military expertise can be brainwashed by media. And that's why when you said about the MP who's now changed his stance, that guy has just been hoodwinked.
Yes.
We are standing not only on the truth of God's word, we're standing on just moral decency when we're standing with Israel. Israel is doing everything in its power to do the right thing.
Yes.
And it is, as far as we can tell, it is doing the right thing majority of the time. And, that's why we need to stand up for truth. So the first campaign is about the BBC, and you'll give the details in a minute. The second campaign is standing against Hamas support in the UK, because again, we have this pro-Hamas lobby, which unfortunately is very much integrated with some of our political parties, including with Labour, where, you will see at Labour conferences, Palestinian flags being waved when you will never see a British flag being waved, and you'll never, ever see an Israeli flag being waved. And unfortunately, within the Palestinian within the Labour Party, there is a strong pro-Palestinian movement, which Keir Starmer and David Lammy have been affected by the campaigning and so forth. And so again, that is a strong movement there, which is the movement we're challenging when it comes to our Justice Not Jihad campaign, because that is countering Hamas. And I'll let you...
I was just going to say that actually the Justice Not Jihad campaign, it is calling upon the UK government to enforce the ban on Hamas, because it is within UK law that Hamas is a prescribed terrorist organisation. But we see little evidence of, or not enough evidence of the law being applied. And we believe that the UK government should be doing more to put pressure on the police, to put pressure on the judicial system, to make sure that that ban is effective and that Hamas support for Hamas doesn't grow and is actually prosecuted, right?
Yep.
So that's a very important campaign, and it is one of the largest petitions that responses that we have seen. Thousands of people have signed this petition, and so we're very grateful for everyone who has already signed that. The details are www.cufi.org.uk/campaigns. If you visit that page, you will see the campaign link to the BBC campaign, as well as to the Justice Not Jihad campaign. Once you have gone through and signed that petition, there's also, as Alex said, there's an option to also write to your MP. We've provided all the wording for a suggested letter, and all that is required is to follow through the link, add your postcode, check the wording, and to hit send, and your MP will receive a letter about this campaign. So there's a two-pronged approach: signing the petition and emailing your MP. And of course, it is an option to write to your MP, but we would really encourage you to do so. Yeah. And also to share the petition. There's an option to share it on Facebook and on your social media channels, because actually, in order for the petition to grow, we need your signature, and we also need you to very kindly share it with others so that we can multiply this petition to get the message out there. And that's what we're about here at CUFI. We want to get the message out, not just any message. We want to get the message of truth out. This is, we believe, pivotal, both for our nation and also for Christian support for Israel, that as CUFI, we continue to speak the truth, to share the message of the importance of standing with Israel and with the Jewish people. And so we have come to the end of this podcast. There was just one thing we missed off, and just for people to be aware of, not just one, I think probably multiple. But can we just inform people that in June there is a gathering at the United Nations, and the United Kingdom and France have said that they are going to meet together to discuss a joint, or they're going to speak jointly about recognizing or potentially recognizing a Palestinian state. Now, there are some caveats within that in terms of what the criteria would be, and France and the UK have slightly different approaches to that. But as an outcome from that gathering, who knows? There could be a consensus between the UK and France in recognizing a Palestinian state. That is for our prayers. So please join with us in praying for Israel, and particularly that there will not be a disillusionment in terms of the two-state delusion or solution, which is a delusion. But thank you very much for standing with us. One more thing.
Yeah, one more thing.
Like notices.
I know. Sorry, we sort of went off track a little bit today. But the other thing, the Houthis. We didn't actually mention the Houthis. I'll just mention it quickly.
I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it.
Yeah. Okay. So with the Houthis, just like obviously it's in the news, but basically the Houthis struck Ben Gurion Airport, or near Ben Gurion Airport. It was an orchard or a tree grove there near there. They have now lost their international airport to Israel because Israel has struck back very hard. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that that's something else to pray about, the situation with the Houthis. President Trump did announce that the Houthis are now backing off from disrupting the shipping lanes in the Red Sea and so forth. So there is hopefully some good things.
Yes, but the agreement between the US, well, not agreement, but this sort of ceasefire between the US and the Houthis is separate, and Houthi leaders have made it very clear that the agreement with the US regarding the shipping lanes does not include that. They basically said we will still be attacking Israel.
Yeah, I just want to point out though that
it's a good sign.
It's a good sign. It's a good sign, but also Israel, I think, showing strength is a good sign because I saw a great quote, and it was like. Basically, because the Houthis were threatening that not only did they strike Ben Gurion Airport or near to it, but they were going to cause an air blockade on Israel because they would stop all planes coming in and out of Israel. Well, in reality, Israel did that to them because the Houthis, I saw a quote and it said, The Houthis struck an orchard next to Ben Gurion Airport, and now Yemen doesn't have an airport. That's how you speak in the Middle East. So
Wow.
I thought that was a great quote, because basically Israel has struck back far more than the Houthis probably expected.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the start, because Israel has said, Iran is behind this. We will also strike them. So
Yes.
all I'm saying is something definitely to pray about. But also, Israel being strong is a good thing, because strength, there is
That's the language in the Middle East.
Yeah, the language in the Middle East. And also there is, actually the way to peace is through strength. You cannot have peace when you have a weak Israel, because the enemies of Israel will try and wipe it out. Whereas when Israel's showing strength, actually it causes the enemies of Israel to second guess themselves and to take note. So we need Israel to be strong, and that includes UK and American support for Israel as well. So yeah, just something to pray about and something to add in there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for that reminder. Please let us know your thoughts about any of the topics that we have discussed in this podcast. Leave your comments, please, in the section below. We're encouraged to read them. We want to know your thoughts as well. And perhaps next time we will cover some of those comments. Although I'm not here for the next one, so hope it goes well, Alex.
Yep.
But please do consider supporting CUFI either by subscribing to our free magazine and free updates to receive by email, or through the post by going to www.cufi.org.uk/subscribe. Or please also consider becoming a partner with CUFI by setting up a monthly donation. Donations towards the work of CUFI UK is essential for the work to continue, but also to enable us to make an impact for Israel in this nation. We're appreciative to all those who already give, so thank you. But if you're not already giving and it's on your heart to support Israel through CUFI, then please do follow the link in the description, which is also on the screen, www.cufi.org.uk/donate. But for now, from me and from Alex, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And let's continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Bye-bye.